All right, so in this video, this is our last video on chapter 15, which is on the Indian influenced area in South Asia. So today what we're going to look at are the Indian influenced areas. So areas that are influenced by India. So just to kind of, again, put this on a map so you can kind of see where we're thinking about. So we've spent the last two videos looking at India itself. Today we're going to spend some time over here in Southeast Asia. We're also going to spend a little bit of time over here on the East African coast. So just to give you an idea of where we're talking about, we're going to spend most of our time over here and a little bit of time over here. But to just kind of get into the right mindset of the influence of India, and remember that now India is mostly Hindu, but with a significant Islamic minority. So instead of there being a Buddhist minority, now we're seeing that there's a significant Islamic minority. And so these religions, Hinduism, Islam, and also a little bit of Buddhism, these three religions are what's going to influence that area that we just looked at. And maybe the best way to kind of get into the right mindset of this kind of dual Hindu Islamic influence is to think about this movement called the Bhakti movement. So the Bhakti movement was I believe it was a 10th century spiritual movement. And what the Bhakti tried to do was to kind of reconcile or put together Hinduism and Islam to try to smooth out the differences. We want to try to show that there aren't a whole lot of differences between these two religions. And so basically what is going on here, the guy involved doing this, his name is Guru, that's his title, Kabir. And what Guru Kabir argues is that all of the gods of Hinduism and also Allah are basically just representations of the same God. They're all manifestations of the same universal deity. So Hindu gods like Vishnu or Shiva, let's spell that correctly, Shiva, and Allah are all different manifestations of the same universal deity. So a deity is just another word for a god. So even though Hinduism is polytheistic and Islam is monotheistic, the general idea of worshiping a god is common to both. And whether or not you like Vishnu or Shiva or Allah, you're all basically worshiping the same idea. And the differences between the religions aren't that big. Now, since you've probably never heard of the Bhakti movement, it's pretty safe to say that it didn't catch on. But what it is evidence of, it is evidence of the, I guess, stability of both religions in India. That they're both here, they're both going to stick around. We have to learn to live with each other. And this is one way, maybe this is one way we could compromise. Maybe it's a compromise the same way that the Sultanate of Delhi has to compromise with the Hindu people that surround it. That in order for India to be calm and peaceful and stable and prosperous, Muslims and Hindus have to get along together. And this is maybe a way we can show that. Maybe that's evidence of this. But now let's leave India and go along. Let's go first to Southeast Asia. So these are Indian influenced states. So, like China, the areas around India will be influenced by it. But unlike China, there's no definite plan to do this. So, like the Tang Dynasty was taking over territory. The Indians aren't doing that. All of this influence is through peaceful cultural diffusion. So the Indians aren't trying to influence these places. It just kind of happens through trade and general travel. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on any of these areas, but I just kind of want to highlight a few of them. So one thing that kind of unites all of these areas that are influenced by India, there's going to be a lot of cultural diffusion, but none of these places adopt the caste system. None of these places adopt the caste system. The caste system is pretty uniquely Indian. All right, so the first one of these places is Funan. And Funan is right in here. This is where Funan is. And Funan has got this little spit of land called the Isthmus of Kra. And I'll write that down here in a second for you. So Funan had this thing called the Isthmus of Kra, or maybe the Isthmus of Kray. I believe these guys were Hindu. But the only thing to really note about these guys is that they basically just survived on what were essentially tolls. So this Isthmus of Kra, they charged you to go across the Isthmus of Kra. So I'm going to bring the map back over here. So if you're trading in China and you want to get back to India, you could either go through these small channels in these islands. You could sail through here, which was a very dangerous journey, or you could take a really long way around and go through here back to India. Or you could take the shortcut, which was you'd sail into here where the Isthmus of Kra is, and you'd hire guys to take your stuff off the boat, bring it over here, put it on another boat, and then you could sail on to India. It was a shortcut. And Funan basically survived on people paying to use that shortcut. Another place that was influenced by India is a place called Srivijaya. So Srivijaya is also, it's over here, or it was over here. And they are very similar to the kingdom of Chola that we talked about in the previous video. So these guys are around from 670 to 1025. Now again, like Chola, they're really only interested in trade and collecting taxes. And they had, unlike India, they had a deep commitment to Buddhism. Now, maybe the most famous of these Indian-influenced states is this one called Angkor. So Angkor is from 889 to 1431. So they replaced Srivijaya in that area. And they were initially Hindu. But over time, they converted to Buddhism. And what's really interesting about Angkor is that we can actually see this conversion happen. And we can see it through these temple complexes, through these huge temple complexes that are now in modern Cambodia. And you can go visit them. They're still there. The most famous of them is called Angkor Wat. And so what's interesting about Angkor Wat is that the oldest parts of it are Hindu. But the more recent parts are Buddhist. And so you can actually watch this conversion happen through a tour of Angkor Wat. Now, another interesting thing about Angkor Wat was that we didn't even know it existed until about 100 years ago. So Angkor was eventually conquered by the people who would eventually turn into the Thai people in Thailand. And Angkor Wat was just abandoned. It was overrun and it was abandoned, and the jungle reclaimed it. So the jungle grew up over this giant temple complex, and it was lost to history. And then about 100 years ago, some people were just walking through the jungle, and they happened upon this giant overgrown temple in the middle of a jungle, Indiana Jones style. And so then it was recovered, and now it's one of the world's most important cultural landmarks, and it's very important to the people of Cambodia. Uh, but it was lost for centuries. Now, there's one more place that I want to bring up. So these places are older when it comes to being influenced by India because they are influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism. There were a few Islamic influenced states through India. And again, we're going to go to Southeast Asia one more time. And we're going to mention the people who live down here, which is kind of where modern Singapore is. And we're going to talk very briefly about the state of Malacca. So Malacca was kind of like Funan in that they controlled an important geographic point. So Funan controlled this Isthmus of Kra, and it was like a shortcut. You paid them to go across this shortcut. Malacca, on the other hand, they controlled this long way around. And so basically, the ships of Malacca kind of patrolled this area and forced ships to go through here and forced them to pay a toll to Malacca. So they forced ships to go around the Isthmus of Kra and pay a toll there. So they're basically forcing you to take the dangerous path and making you pay to do it. So the influence of India was a lot more decentralized. There was no real effort to spread this stuff out of India. It just kind of happened through trade. And it does reflect the very decentralized nature of India. There was no effort to do any of this, it just kind of happened. I do want to take just a minute and talk about what's going on the other side of the Indian Ocean. And let's talk about a little bit of Africa. So basically, we're going to be talking about the stuff going on right here on the west side of the Indian Ocean. So East Africa, or the west side of the Indian Ocean. So one place in here that doesn't quite fit the description we've been talking about is the kingdom of Axum. Now, I bring up the kingdom of Axum here for two reasons. One, there's no other good time to really talk about the kingdom of Axum. It just kind of fits in here. But it does also show the strength of missionaries, because the kingdom of Axum was one of the very first governments to adopt Christianity. So Axum is in modern Ethiopia. So this is where Axum is now. And so they were one of the very first places to convert to Christianity. So missionaries from Judea came down here and spread Christianity to Axum. And they remained Christian even after the rest of their neighbors converted to Islam. Which is going to lead to a weird occurrence in that Ethiopian Christianity is going to be really different than the rest of Christianity. They've basically been cut off from the rest of the Christian world, and they're going to turn out a lot different, but we'll worry about that later. But I think it's interesting to kind of think about them as kind of growing up in a bubble. Like they're not being influenced by other Christians, and so they kind of have to figure out the answers to these questions all by themselves. So they kind of come up with their own solutions, and Ethiopian Christianity is going to be pretty different from the rest of Christianity. But the other places in Africa I want to draw your attention to very briefly are down here on the coast. So these two cities, the city of Mogadishu and the city of Dar es Salaam, are also important city-states that are influenced by India. So these cities, and we're going to call them Swahili city-states. And so I'm going to mention two of them, Mogadishu and Dar es Salaam, are Swahili city-states. Now, Swahili is an Arabic word for coaster, meaning someone living on the coast. And so these Swahili city-states are important African trade hubs on the Indian Ocean, the same way that any of those other emporia we might find on the coast of India were. So these were emporia cities. Just like we talked about in India in the previous video, these Swahili city-states are very diverse places. You're going to find people of all different religions and backgrounds in these Swahili city-states. And Swahili is it's an Arabic word, but the language of Swahili is a very interesting mixture of African languages and Arabic and other languages that you might have heard if you were trading in the Indian Ocean. So, to kind of wrap all this up, India is influencing the entirety of the Indian Ocean, but they're not doing it on purpose. It's just kind of happening as they do their trading. So I'm going to stop there. So this is the end of our stuff on India and the Indian Ocean. So that's it. This is Mr. Nissen signing off.